Hello, everyone, and welcome. Let's give everyone a few minutes to jump on, so we'll get started in a little bit. Thank you.
All right, I still see some folks coming in. I think we're almost there, just about ready to get started as folks are continuing to join. Alexis, do you want to go ahead and kick us off?
All right. Well, on behalf of Rackspace Technology, we welcome you to our first Coffee Talk episode of the year. We hope you grabbed your coffee and are ready to dive in. For first time attendees, this is a space where Rackspace Technology experts share perspectives, trends, and solutions on the top technology challenges of 2024. I am pleased to introduce you to our two speakers today, Josh Pruitt, our Senior VP of Solution and Engineering, and Ed Kerr, Director of Product. Josh and Ed, who have a combined 20 years of experience at Rackspace and a combined 40 years of tech experience. Without further ado, let's hear what they have to say about brewing efficiency and optimizing costs.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alexis. Boy, that introduction sure did make me feel old, though. But it is what it is. So everybody, thanks for joining so much. I hope you do have coffee. I have mine. And so with me is Ed Kerr. Now, funny story. So Ed Kerr, in order to get ready for the presentation today, he did the whole, all right, I'm going to restart my computer, get everything running smoothly. And then, of course, all the updates wanted to install. And so, Ed, you're joining me by phone right now while your computer tries to
I
load the updates.
am.
Is that right? Yeah, there it is.
I
So,
and regarding the feeling old thing, I think we also talked about having a combined 80 to 90 years of life experience as well. So be
true story.
impressed there. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
be impressed. That's exactly it. I love it. So yeah, as Ed's computer decides that it wants to work, he'll hop on and we'll get to see his smiling face. But in the meantime, I wanted to one just welcome everybody to the first coffee talk of the year. So I think this is really cool and exciting. The format here, the idea. There's a couple of slides that have like the questions or maybe what we're talking about, and the team's updating those in real time as we move around. But the whole idea here is to get just some technologists in a room virtually to just talk about what's going on in the industry and field questions from anybody who wants to join and chat through it. So if you were hoping that you would join and get like 30 minutes of just jam-packed, 15 slides, and we're going to read through all the slides, sorry to disappoint. That's not what's happening. We're just hanging out, having coffee, talking about what's going on in the world. And so this very first one, the subject for it is around cost optimization and efficiency. And to me, I think that this is really, really germane, really important to what's going on, because you look at where just tech is in general, and gosh, we were really the global darling 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, tech in general was sort of where everything was at. And you had the whole, the great migration of jobs after everybody came back from COVID, and everybody was hiring like crazy. And now recently you've seen, more and more companies doing, layoffs and trying to drive down to profit. I mean, I think I saw a stat that said this year alone, so just in the first, 2.5 months of this year, there's already been 50,000 layoffs in tech from, Meta and AWS and everybody. And that, of course, kind of trickles down into what all companies are dealing with. And so to me, cost optimization and efficiencies is really a good place to start, right? It's how are you driving towards the bottom line, and how are you looking to, save money, whether you're leading, IT spend, or as a CIO, or your director of infrastructure, or you're just trying to keep the lights running for you and your business. So I think, kind of first topic is we're seeing more and more folks that are looking to exit running a data center. So Ed, maybe do you want to talk about like what kind of challenges are you seeing happen when people are trying to run a data center? What's going on in the DC world?
yeah, one, running systems, complex systems is hard. As you can see, I'm still not on video, and that is just one example of how hard these things can be. And
That's
so
not
when you're
even a
running a
complex
data
system. That's a laptop.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, imagine how much harder a data center is. And so the first kind of call out there is that when you're running a data center and you have to keep up all of the infrastructure, an example would be like making sure all of my ESXi versions are up to date, right? For VMware, as an example. These things, when they go right, they're fairly straightforward. But when they go wrong, they can take an army to fix in time to make sure that your business doesn't lose money. And so when we talk about optimizing our costs and making sure we don't lose money, we also have to make sure that we continue our operations and we continue to meet our customers where they need us to be. And that means making sure that we have seamless operations, we've got the right people, the right tools, and the right equipment in place. And that can be costly. That can be difficult to acquire from an expertise perspective. And it can oftentimes be the point of failure in which a data center starts to crumble and erode into the business margins. And that's really, I think, the number one problem when you're running a data center is the risk that you pose when you become an army of one, as opposed to working in a larger ecosystem with the right tools, et cetera.
Yeah, the people power is certainly part of it, right? Some of the other things that I see pop up are utility rates are just going crazy, and this is something that we deal with at Rackspace. We've got about 40 data centers globally, and just the utility rates from for electric and power from providers is unpredictable, and getting more and more unpredictable as global events play out. And so it's another one of those cost challenges. I have seen some, and at Rackspace we do some pre-buying or commitments on power. You can do swaps on power, things like that. So if you're in a DC and that's something that you're running into, is that unpredictability of power, that is something to consider. I think you called it out right with legacy applications, and it's also about getting, we would call it smart hands, right? But smart hands to be able to actually go and manage the metal that's in the racks. And we're continuing to see folks that have to be in data centers that can't move into a public cloud because they're in highly regulated industries. They have to make sure that they own their data at rest and data in transit. So those are a lot of the considerations that we see. But more and more folks are trying to get out of running their own data center, and so we're seeing an uptick in people that don't want to manage their own DC, and recognize that when I say DC, it could literally be a data center or a DC hall. But oftentimes for the commercial or even mid-market customer, a data center to them is the closet that's over there in the office, right? And so more and more we're seeing folks that are trying to get out of running a data center and looking for alternatives to it. So sometimes we'll see those as how can they make that migration off of bare metal? How can they do that logically? And hey, look, we've got Ed live and in person. Ed, you made it, man. But we don't have audio. So Ed's going to fix that, man. Rough day for Ed. Rough day for Ed Kerr. So while Ed's doing that, so oftentimes we'll see folks that have issues with their migration, and they're trying to figure out where to go. Whether that's OpenStack or VMware are kind of the two main cloud control planes, if you will, that we're seeing more and more as people are making the move over to them.
Can you hear me now, Josh? Sorry.
There we go. We got Ed
All
back.
right. I missed the last few seconds of that, but that's part of a live dynamic talk. And I did have a question for you, Josh, though. But before I did, I wanted to make sure you brought your coffee mug. You did. I've got mine. I don't drink coffee. That's a Swan. This is from my wife, since I don't drink coffee. But I do have a cup with water here. That's empty. And there you go. Can't even put it in the water in my mouth. It fell out. I was so excited to be here with you, Josh. But as somebody who has been in the business a long time and has actually worked alongside our teams to deliver a data center for our customers, I know we're talking about like data centers can be hard. And I gave one example where an ESXi host needs to be kept up to date. And you gave an example about power and utilities. But like just being boots on the ground, like why is a data center hard to manage when you're sitting there? You're the one racking and cabling. Why is that a difficult thing?
Oh man, so it's a lot of things. So one is just the general layout of a DC. You've got to figure out your space, power, cooling, all of that good stuff, right? Like everybody recognizes that these little computers that we're on, they produce all the heat, and you've got to figure that out at scale when running a data center. But you've got to figure out your staffing for 24/7, because it turns out that hardware failures don't take breaks on holidays, and they don't take breaks on weekends, right? And so inevitably your hardware is going to break at 3 a.m. on a Saturday. That's just the nature of things, and how the tech gods work. So you've got to deal with your 24/7 staff. They have to be trained people who know what they're doing and dealing with. Ideally, you've got everything logically, cabled, laid out, routed, everything's labeled well. It never is, right? So one thing that I love taking customers through a Rackspace data center, because Boy, they're beautiful. Like all the pictures you see on our website, all that stuff, those aren't like photoshopped or made up. Those are just live pictures from our data center. But so oftentimes you're not dealing with that. You're dealing with where does this cable go and what does it plug into.
Yep.
You're dealing with migrations. You're dealing with power fluctuations. You're dealing with ISPs and provider lines coming in. You want to make sure that you have multiple provider lines and managing those, managing your bandwidth traffic in and out. Like there's just a whole slew of things that goes into it that makes it tough. And then just a quick shout out for all the folks that are attendees here. Feel free to drop into the chat or into the Q&A. We'll call out questions as they come in. I see like we've got Ned saying hi from Virginia. We've got Robert saying bonjour from Winnipeg. So keep those coming in. We'll address those. It doesn't just have to be Ed and I chatting through.
Yeah, and I will say, I think the hardest part about running a data center in my mind isn't even the technology. Like everybody in here is likely some sort of technologist. Like we could figure out how to have a hot aisle and a cold aisle. We could figure out how to wrap the cables up beautifully, like with enough time, right? Like that could be figured out. It's about all the other things. Like running a data center isn't just about the technology. It's about the physical security, right? Like if you want to take account for and make sure that you're not compromised, then you need to figure out how to have physical security. You have to also figure out how to be present regulated workloads inside of that space. Like how do you meet local legal requirements? And so there are a lot of things that kind of surround the data center that make it hard to manage. And those all imply a cost. So if I'm a business that runs, let's say I'm a shoe company and I want to sell something online, so I need a couple workload servers or servers that can deploy my website, right? I could choose to work with a partner or I could choose to do that myself. But if I do it myself, I'm not just operating the technology. I'm figuring out how to do it in specific regions. I'm figuring out how to make sure my physical data center is secure. I'm doing it, I'm trying to figure out payroll. All of these types of things, right? Like those are the types of things that I have to consider. And that's where the hidden cost is, because a lot of companies can shoulder the burden of the technology costs. Like it's easy to say, in order for me to make $1 billion, I got to spend $1 million on gear. Like, let's do it. But then it's like all of a sudden you realize it's not $1 million on gear. It's $1 million on gear plus, a couple $100,000 in lawyers' fees and, getting the right, contracts in place, making sure you have the physical security presence, making sure you have the right, RFID cards so that people get access. Like when you add all that up together, you start to realize that there's like a tip of the iceberg effect where the costs are largely hidden. And that's part of the problem, is that these costs are unexpected to some people. And if you don't know how to manage them, this can become quickly untenable for a lot of customers.
Boy, no kidding. And you want to talk about unexpected costs, right? So you've got cost optimization and efficiency is the topic here today. Unexpected costs. Let's talk about what's going on with Broadcom acquisition of VMware. What are you seeing, Ed? I know this is a space that you're over. Just generally, what are you seeing in the world?
Yeah, look, I mean, the reality is that whether it's Broadcom or some other vendor, vendors are going to continuously change their position in the market. They're going to go, I mean, Oracle did it a few years ago where they went from RAM to CPU and the entire market had to pivot. VMware is doing it now in a number of ways. And so this is not a new phenomenon. And I think what's important here is for customers who are consuming these services to be ready to pivot in certain key ways. So as an example, again, using Broadcom, Broadcom went from VRAM to CPU counts, right? Like that's how they measure their license now. And so what kinds of things could I do as a customer to mitigate that cost? Well, for one, I could optimize my servers around cores now, right? I could have less cores on the server and have more RAM, because maybe before I limited my RAM because I didn't want to pay that, that license fee, but now I just do the opposite. And so a lot of people, I think the first folly in that space is that people look at the price increase and they kind of take it for granted at face value and say, well, if I do nothing, it's going to be a 500% increase. It's like, yeah, if you do nothing. And sometimes like doing something has a cost too, right? Like if I have a bunch of gear that I just bought yesterday and I haven't sweat that asset as a company, I can't just turn around and instantly buy new gear just to optimize for it. Like it doesn't always make sense. But taking intelligent actions to optimize, I think, makes a whole lot of sense. But there are other things you could do to mitigate cost. And again, using Broadcom as an example, you've got certain tools that they are now bundling into their license, the ARIA Enterprise Suite, right? And these tools are likely things that if I'm a customer running my own data center, I'm either using VMware tools and paying separately for them, and now I get some cost efficiency there, but I'm also probably paying third-party vendors. Like observability tools or monitoring tools. Now, maybe I don't have to do that because I'm using VROPS. And so those are the kinds of things that you've got to consider when, these vendor changes occur. It's like, what can I do? And so the way I approach it is I look at the changes they made, and then I say, how does this impact me? So like they went from VRAM to core. So this impacts me in this, quantifiable way. And then what can I do to mitigate that? And you do that line by line with each and every change until you have a comprehensive strategy for how to mitigate that. Now that's hard. And it took an army of rackers to be able to have us come up with our response to that. And so it may not be feasible for all customers, but there are plenty of partners like Rackspace out there in the market who can help customers do that.
Yeah, and one of the things you called out is because they're making that switch from RAM to CPU, is optimizing more around that. And so this is one where if you go and you read like VMware documentation, it'll tell you, hey, your call it over provisioning rate or contention ratio or whatever you want to call it, right? But the conversion of taking physical cores in the box and making them into virtual CPUs for your VMs to run on, VMware documentation will tell you like, oh, you should use like a 3 to 4 or maybe 5 to 1. Yeah, they'll tell you like at most use 5 to 1. Well, I mean, I'll tell you, Ed, and I've seen this in practice with we have thousands and thousands of customers, and they're all doing different things. We see this in practice every day that oftentimes you can get those contention ratios depending on the workload, depending on the VM, depending on what you're running. You can easily push that up to 10 to 1, 15 to 1 in a lot of cases, and really stretch those cores, because you're paying by the core. You're not paying by the vCPU, right? You're paying by the core. And so really stretch those cores by getting just a higher contention ratio out of it. And to me, it's almost like your local oil change place. They're going to tell you that you need to change your oil much more frequently than you might actually have to in your car. To me, VMware is kind of doing the same thing, right? Like, hey, like 3, maybe 4 to 1, when in reality, you can stretch those cores a lot farther. And so I think that's a huge call out for anybody who's going through this, shift with Broadcom, is really put under scrutiny what your contention ratio is and your vCPU to CPU ratio is. And stretch it, see what happens, spin up some test workloads, and you see how they perform, because you might just very well be over allocating. I love what you called out about the, call it optimize as well, if you will, of taking advantage of some of the applications that come with VCF. Do you want to, were there any other examples that you've seen or come across on that?
Yeah, and I just want to say, I want to double down on something you said, because I think it's really critical. I think what you're talking about is like a flaw in averages, right? Like VMware doesn't know, or no, we don't know what workloads you're running. And so when we give you like a 5 to 1 ratio, it's some average of the market, or 4 to 1 ratio, it's some average. Like we're taking a swag at it. But when you, to your point, like look at that and say, what is this workload doing? Is it a web server? Is it a AI high performance compute node? Like these things have different requirements. And so you can use a different contention ratio, like 5 to 1, 10 to 1, 8 to 1, even lower than that, depending on the workload. And we'll get to this when we talk about public cloud, but at the core of it, like precision is what will save you money. Like knowing your workloads and taking appropriate action based on that workload is where efficiency is at. It's hard work, and it in and of itself has a cost. So you have to be good at that in order to access those savings. But the reality is that's the core principle of everything we're going to be talking about today, is knowing your workload and taking the appropriate and precise action against it.
Yep, that's spot on. Well, so I don't want to steal your soundbite here, but one thing that you've come up with when you talk about this is optimize, adopt, escape, right? So we talked about optimization. Look at optimizing for cores. We talked about adopting, right? Actually adopting the suite that comes from VCF. So using like ARIA to maybe displace Datadog, or maybe you can use it to displace Splunk, depending on what you're doing from a logging perspective. You can consider that. Talk about escape. What do you mean whenever you say escape?
Well, at the end of the day, like everything it's a calculus, right? Like, do I value what Broadcom is offering me at the price they're offering it? And if you go through the optimize and adopt phases and realize that the cost for what you're getting out of it is too high, then you always have the option to escape. And that could mean a public cloud option. And that's like the easy answer, right? Like that's what every CIO is telling you to do out there, or CTO is telling you to do today, is like go to the public cloud, because that's like, it's trendy, right? But again, if we go back to like the precision conversation, there will be some workloads that should certainly go to the public cloud, but there will also be some workloads that need to stay in the private cloud. And the real interesting conversation in my mind to be had is if you need to escape VMware in the private cloud world, where do you go? Do you go to Nutanix? Do you go to OpenStack? And what does an escape strategy look like? And what do you need to consider? And I think fundamentally, what you need to look at is a couple of things. You need to look at, did this experience with Broadcom and the license increase like sour me on, license type models? Like, do I go open source? Do I embrace OpenStack? Right now, there's challenges there, and we can talk about that. That's not an easy thing to do, and not everybody can do it. Though companies like Rackspace can help make that easier. The point is that there are things to consider there. Or you could go to like a Nutanix type alternative, but it too has a cost, right? Like you can't always just one-to-one copy and paste your environment into Nutanix and just like, yeah, everything's working. So I think fundamentally that's what the escape option is. The escape option is to look at your workloads and say, is there enough value for me to stay? And if not, where do I go? Does this workload make sense in the public cloud? Is it architected correctly? Can I support it in an OpenStack environment where I can avoid vendor lock-in and avoid all the license fees and all the drama that I'm experiencing, but I need to have certain experience on tap in order to be successful? Or do I go to Nutanix and invest in all new capital expenditure and gear and things like that so that I can have compatible gear and make that move? All of these are questions that are kind of going to be wrestled with. In my mind, though, the market or the OpenStack market has developed in such a way that I do think it's an extremely viable solution. And we at Rackspace put our money where our mouth is and are double downing on our own OpenStack solutions, launching multi-cloud tenant versions, our OpenStack Flex, and our private cloud solution. So this isn't just me saying like, oh yeah, OpenStack, it sounds great. It's me saying we're writing checks at Rackspace, betting that OpenStack is a viable alternative for those customers who can't make VMware work. And so I think that's the kind of analysis that everybody needs to be doing if they want to escape the cost of these upgrades or increases.
I think that's spot on, right? So, for all of the folks that are on the call, I think if you're experiencing this with whether it's Broadcom or really, any license that you're trying to deal with, I love Ed's framework. Again, to summarize that was optimize against what you're being charged for. Broadcom changed the game from RAM to CPU, so optimize for CPU. Adopt the technology and look for where there are feature sets within it that bring value that could allow you to displace other things that you're paying for, or escape, right? Look for the alternatives. And Ed, to your point, the I guess most prolific private cloud option for escaping VMware would be to OpenStack. Let's talk about if maybe you make that shift into public cloud, if it's time to move into public cloud. You said something about identifying when a workload is good for private cloud and when a workload is good for public cloud. Now, for me personally, the litmus test that I always like to use is I joke that, look, if I look at a customer's AWS bill and it's like 80% EC2, that I just want to grab them and shake them and say, like, what are you doing? Why are you paying so much for that on-demand compute? And that's sort of the litmus test that I use for, is something a good viable candidate for public cloud or private cloud? Is if you're planning to run it all in VMs, it's probably not a good candidate for public cloud. What advice do you have for folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with you that that's the single most important metric to look at is like, am I architected for a public cloud experience? And here's one example why that might be problematic if you're not. So everybody talks about runaway costs, but like what could be at the root of runaway costs in a public cloud? Well, there's cost of unused resources. So today I might need EC2, tomorrow I don't. If I have an application that properly scales, like a containerized application that scales with my usage, and spins resources up and down accordingly via automation, then there's very little risk of unused resources. But if it's a VM that I provisioned at a certain amount and then tomorrow I need less resources, nothing is necessarily going in there and saying like, oh, let me take away these resources to save you some money. And so unless you dedicate people or you use tools like, say, Cloud Health or AWS Cost Explorer to constantly keep an eye on it, like you're going to find that you quickly have these costs like pile up. Like you won't quite know why, but your costs will forever just keep going up and up and up and up and up until you're all out of jobs and out of business. And so then the kind of natural pushback in that, like the pendulum swing is your company will see that at some point. It'll be some threshold that's passed. And at this point, this would have already happened to you hundreds of times, if not thousands of times. And then somebody will be tasked with right sizing the environment as a whole. And they'll be scratching their head like, how did this go unnoticed for like 8 years? We could have saved $20 million. Like, how many jobs was that? And so the answer to stopping that, to your point, is to architect your application to take advantage of a lot of the benefits in the cloud, to utilize things like reserved instances, to have cost monitoring tools in place that are regularly audited against, and to make sure that the cost of unused resources are constantly being audited and mitigated at every step of the cloud journey.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think that sort of testing where an application should live or where a workload should live, as whether that's public cloud or private cloud, I think that's really key. I think there's so many benefits that do come from public cloud, and this is the other piece that I like to call out, is that for a workload that has truly been refactored, re-architected to run and take advantage of those cloud native services, I mean, it's pretty slick. It's hard to beat, Lambda and serverless and, like if you're using simple queuing service or using step functions, it's tough to beat some of the capabilities that exist out there. And so maybe let's talk a bit about like what that, whether it's hybrid multi-cloud or how exactly those things work together. And I'll call out, I think that a lot of people, myself included, have used hybrid and multi-cloud interchangeably in the past. To me, if we're sort of setting on definitions, multi-cloud is just, are you using multiple clouds? And I think that pretty much every company out there, in every IT department out there, is multi-cloud by default, whether they mean to be or not, right? They've got data stored in Salesforce Cloud, or they're using M365, or they're using Google Drive, or they're using Dropbox. And then additionally, they might have something at AWS. They might have something on-prem as a private cloud. They might have something with Rackspace. Like, to me, most every company in 2024 is multi-cloud, like it or not.
For sure.
Hybrid is sort of how those work together. Do you want to talk, Ed, maybe about like what hybrid means and where you've seen that work successfully?
Yeah, I mean, just look at every player in this space over the last few years, whether that's Dell or VMware or the hyperscalers, et cetera. The focus of the companies like Dell and VMware were to, when they're messaging the market, was to take cloud chaos, which is that multi-cloud thing that you talked about, and create some sort of harmony amongst these clouds. And so what they did strategically was they deployed versions of NSX, as an example, that could seamlessly deploy network rules across every hyperscaler within one console. Or companies like Datadog, who build observability tools that have hundreds of integrations out of the box, ready for any cloud you could possibly want. And so it's these tools that bring kind of like harmony around this multi-cloud or hybrid cloud or multi-cloud experience, turning it into a hybrid cloud experience. And so when Rackspace went to the market, and as one of, if not the biggest hybrid cloud companies on the planet, we started to look at those tools and said, which of these tools can we embrace in order to truly live the message that no matter where your workloads like need to live, we've got an answer for that. And I think that's also a place where costs can be a problem, right? Like, you have to now decide which of these tools that you want to use. And again, it's the tip of the iceberg conversation. You could decide to be a full-time license and sourcing manager who gets the best deal on everything, or you could find partners who have these in place, these sourcing agreements in place. I know we're out of time, so I want to give you a chance to either wrap it up or address quick questions, but
yeah. Well, so I know that that we've got I think 15 minutes set aside for some Q&A, and so we'll jump into that here shortly. I agree with everything else that you're saying, and then I'll add on one more of those concerns around hybrid cloud, and that's what I think has been really interesting in the market over just the past month. You've seen folks like Google started it, and then AWS followed suit with making these big PR announcements talking about how, hey, we're not going to charge you for egress fees when you're moving out of our cloud. And this has been one of the deterrents for companies that are truly using hybrid and using multiple clouds that are constantly talking to each other for the same workloads, has been egress fees. And I've sort of seen this. It's been interesting. It's gotten a lot of attention as, hey, these hyperscalers are killing off egress fees, but I think it's the fine print that's been missed. And so the piece that I would call out around that fine print is, Google and then AWS followed suit. I don't know if Azure's made an announcement yet. If they haven't, I'm sure they will. That says, hey, we're not charging you for egress fees. That's only a one-time, we're not charging you for egress fees. It's when you are actually leaving, or we in the industry would call it churn, when you're churning from a platform. So if you say to AWS, hey, I'm leaving you guys, I'm never using you again, then that one time to move that data out, they're not going to charge you for, but they are still going to charge you for all of the normal communication
while you live
back
there.
and forth. Yeah, exactly. While you live there. Ed, I love my analogies, and so one of the analogies I've been using on that is it's like if you have a homeowners association where you live, and the HOA decides that, hey, so that we can pay for the roads, every time a car leaves the neighborhood, we're going to charge them $5. And so, you leave in the morning to drop your kids off at school, you pay $5. You leave to go get groceries, pay $5. You go get the kids at the end of the day, pay $5. The DoorDash guy comes and he drops off food and then he leaves, you pay $5 on his behalf. That's kind of what egress fees have been in public cloud. And all that they've really done by removing egress fees is said, hey, when you get so fed up with our crazy fees, and you decide to leave, we're not going to charge you the $5 for the U-Haul to take your crap out of here, right? That's all they've done, is they've just said that one time, we're not going to charge you for it, but everything else still applies.
But that's not what I want, right? Like I don't want to sell my house because I'm tired of paying the fees. Like I just want to be happy in my home, and if I do sell, it's going to be for other reasons. Like
not because of the crazy fees from the HOA.
Yeah.
I love it. I see a couple of questions in here. So Mahendra is asking, and I think this is right up your alley, Ed. Mahendra's asking, what level of costs increases are you seeing from VMware? What are you seeing changing to the pricing model? I know that we're still working through things with them for Rackspace specifically, but just maybe talk broadly. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of this information is out there in Google, but I have the luxury of having been able to process it for a considerable amount of time and execute a strategy to mitigate it. So I'm going to give you that perspective. So there are several major changes that Broadcom made. The first one was a shift from perpetual to subscription model. The second one was moving from RAM to core, which as a sub bullet, like that per core price MSRP is $350 per core, right? Like that's what the market understands. That's what's out there in the world. Now, obviously, VMware partners with people regularly to give them discounts, including Rackspace, based on like the relationships, the scale. And so VMware is a great partner in that respect, and they give us opportunities to kind of leverage that. So one way that cost savings occurs to work with a partner or to work with VMware to get the best possible price. But the truth is that has its limitations with any partner. The next couple points is where you really kind of have to hone in on these changes. And the first thing I'd call out is we talked about optimization earlier. If you don't optimize, then we're seeing customers taking massive increases, like somewhere in the ballpark of 200 to 300%. Now, I think that's unfair to VMware to a degree, because those are changes if you don't do anything. If you don't go from optimized to RAM to core, if you don't take advantage of some of the tools in the VCF bundle that you now get that you previously did not get. And so it's not an apples to apples comparison. However, I think even VMware would at some level admit that there is a subset of customers out there who, no matter how much they mitigate the costs, they optimize, et cetera, it still becomes an unviable position under these new rules for that customer to consume that. And so to answer your question very specifically, these changes have resulted in a wild variance of cost increases, somewhere in the magnitude of like 20% all the way up to 300%. But if you're in the 300% range, there's likely reasonable actions you can take to get down that scale. And if you're in the 20% range, then you likely were already consuming a lot of the bundles and features and tools that were already in place. And you should just, enjoy like the fact that that's true for you. And so the answer to your question is that it varies wildly, but that's not the important takeaway. The important takeaway is that people like Rackspace or IBM or any of the other companies who've been wrestling with this as partners have had to do the same things your organizations are going to have to do, which is figure out now how to take these rules as they exist and either adopt, escape, or optimize, right? Like those are your choices really fundamentally. And how you respond to that is going to be different for each organization. But again, not to plug Rackspace too much, but we've been through it already with our own VMware journey over the last few months, and we know how to help customers do that. So, finding a partner like that is going to be immensely helpful in the market.
All right. Thank you, Ed, for that awesome answer to that question. Our next question is, we have no experience with OpenStack. How viable would it be for us to use the technology?
Well, that's a great question.
It is.
You want me to go first, or you want to go first, Ed?
Go for it.
So it's a tough question because it just like every good question is, it depends. But let me call out some of that. I think that first and foremost, OpenStack is an extremely mature project. OpenStack is the third most contributed to open source project in the world. It goes the Linux kernel, the Chromium browser, OpenStack. And so it's highly contributed to. It's a very large scale open source project, right? As far as like how viable is it for you to be able to use it, there is expertise that comes with it. There is a reason why people have been paying VMware for licensing, right? Is because it can be complex and it can be challenging. I think that Rackspace is very unique here in that we founded OpenStack, right? Like we were one of the original founders with NASA that got together in about 2011, 12 and launched and built OpenStack and launched it out into the market. And so what started as just very simple object storage and very simple compute, like VM provisioning, has now gone into, like I said, being the third most popular open source software project in the world. And with that comes significant experience in running, managing, updating, optimizing OpenStack environments for customers. And so it's an area where, if you're just like, hey, brilliant technologist, awesome architect, and you want to go and implement it for yourself and for your entire organization, that can be really hard. That can be really overwhelming. Rackspace has a lot of different services that we offer to help customers along that way. And Ed, maybe you can dive into what some of those services are without going too much into like this being a sales pitch, because it's coffee talk, not sales pitch. But
sure.
I think that it really does come down to, do you have the expertise to be able to run it? You absolutely can. You just might need some help in some areas. Ed?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you were to do a simple exercise and say on the left-hand side, here's the VMware tools I know, like vSAN or Horizon or VROPS or whatever. And then I were to plot on the right-hand side, like OpenStack Telemetry or OpenStack Horizon or Ceph or Neutron, you would likely like hit the notes where you're like, oh, this does that, this does that. That's like, there's these corresponding things. So these tools exist. They're out there and they're open source. So you could like go use them today, right? Like you could go figure them out. The challenge is when you take all of these tools and configure and make them work for your specific needs. VMware has a lot of like out of the box, easy to use GUIs and pre-configured templates and a very robust partner ecosystem and a very like well-oiled support mechanism so that you can get help, really great documentation. Not to say that OpenStack doesn't have great documentation. The community documentation is actually quite phenomenal. But it's about putting these things together that's really hard. And I think, Josh, when you talk about the value of a partner, like no partner is going to really spend their time rebuilding Ceph or rebuilding, OpenStack Telemetry or rebuilding Neutron. What their value is going to be is taking these tools and creating some packaged deployment of OpenStack that makes sense out of the box so that it looks a lot like VMware. And so in a sense, what you're getting is you're getting like our version of OpenStack as we see it for VMware, as opposed to you having to build your own VMware relevant ecosystem, but on OpenStack. And the magnitude of difficulty on those is orders of difference, right? Like it's infinitely harder to build your own version of our OpenStack Flex or our OpenStack Enterprise or our OpenStack Business, which are essentially combinations of these tools that offer different experiences, and do that yourself than it would be to just come buy it from us for the most part, the same price, right? Like if not cheaper than what it would take you to build it yourself, right? Because you have to factor in development costs and all that kind of stuff. And so I think fundamentally that's why Rackspace has invested in, and again, to your point, this isn't a sales pitch. I bring up Rackspace only so that you could see that we drink our own champagne, that we're out there doing the things in the market that we're telling you to do. And whether you choose us or another partner is irrelevant to me at this point. What I want you guys to get is that the value in moving to OpenStack and finding a partner is that they have thought about all the things, like how should I deploy Neutron deployments for networking? How should I do my Ceph deployments? How should I do all of these things? And we've kind of created best practices, and we deploy that for every one of our customers. And that's the real value when you work with a partner. And that's how you overcome the conversation about like, wow, OpenStack's hard. It is if you do it by yourself. It's not if you work with someone who's already solved that for you.
Yeah. Really great
Awesome.
answer.
Thank you so much, guys. And I think we have time for one more question really quickly. This next question is, we went through a migration to the public cloud and costs have risen more than we had planned. But how do we justify yet another migration when we just went through one?
Yeah.
Ed, you want to take the first stab at it?
Sure. Look, like my answer is going to kind of suck, because like it really does depend. So you would look at the situation and you would want to identify like, why are my costs running away? Why are they doing that? And there may be things you can do to make your existing situation work, but there also may be, to Josh and my point earlier, things that would be cost prohibitive, like re-architecting my application because it's just not built to take advantage of that. And in that case, you really just have a fundamental business decision to make, which is the cost of operating my business at a reasonable run rate for the next 3 years equal to or greater than the cost of migration? And if it is, then no matter how painful it may feel for your organization to do it so soon afterwards, like if you're a profit-seeking company, which allegedly all companies are, then you ought to do this thing. Again, we don't see this bear fruit in the marketplace. Like we actually see companies who should on paper do things all the time say no to those things for whatever reason. I'm sure it happens in Rackspace as well. But again, at its most basic level, that's all it is. And I would argue, and this is kind of where I'm taking like the flaw of averages and using it to make an argument, I would say that if your application isn't architected to take advantage of all the native tools, Kubernetes, auto scaling, and all the benefits of the cloud, that if you look at a 3 to 5 year scale, which every business should be looking at least that far into the future, then you ought to consider moving those workloads to a place where those things aren't a requirement in order for you to have predictable, cost-effective balance sheets at the end of the month.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add on to that is it doesn't have to be either or. It doesn't have to be, we were on private cloud, we moved to public cloud, we're considering repatriation back to private cloud. That's not the world that we're going to be in going forward. It is a hybrid multi-cloud world. And so don't look at it as, oh, I'm admitting defeat because we moved. Like, no, that's nonsense. It's about putting the workload in the right place for the requirements that you have. And so consider that as you come and look at it, is that it's not a step back, it's an evolution forward. You're going from a singular location into a hybrid cloud mindset. And so consider it as what should stay in public cloud because it has been refactored or will be refactored within the next 6-12 months or something like that. And then what are the things that need to sit outside of public cloud because they're just not on the roadmap for refactorization within the next year or two. So I think do consider that. And then Ed called it out so well, right? Like at the end of the day, even if you're not new to your company, act like you are. Act like you just stepped into that CIO role and you're presented with, here's where all of our assets are, and make the right decision going forward. Don't buy into a sunk cost fallacy that says, oh, but we just did this. Like, well, the past is the past. You can learn from it, but like you gotta think about the future going forward.
And if all else fails, find a partner. I know this sounds like repetitive, but find a partner who can not only help you make the migration seamless and efficient from a cost perspective, but who might also fund that migration. Rackspace does this, again, putting our money where our mouth is. We use the Rackspace AMP program to help customers mitigate the costs associated with migrating into Rackspace. So if you're putting your workloads within Rackspace's data centers within our four walls, you can actually mitigate the cost of that migration utilizing Rackspace funding. It's a lot like the AWS MAP program or the Azure AMP program or et cetera, right? And so look for those types of programs as well. There is free money everywhere. And I think it would be wise for the organizations who are in that position to find ways to take advantage of that as well.
All right, awesome. Thank you all for all of your questions. However, we have reached the time limit for this episode, but a Rackspace Technology Cloud expert will answer those that remain via email. And for those of you who want to talk to us, a QR code is on the screen now, which you can scan, and a link is in the chat so we can continue the conversation. To our guests, we thank you very much for the time that you took to join this coffee talk. Stay tuned for more information on our next episode. And thank you so much to our speakers, Josh and Ed. You all are awesome. And we'll see everyone at the next one. Thank you.
Join us at Swan Talk next time. Yeah. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.